Hello and welcome everybody. I'm back with another video. It will be part 2 of creating a game of Sudoku using React and Node. So the last video was about making a solver and a creator for the puzzle for the game of Sudoku. So we did quite some things. It was quite a long video, and today's video will not going to be a shorter one as well. So I have made some changes to the previous code. Let me explain them to you quickly. So I changed the code, the functions that we wrote to a class so that we can use it over and over again whenever we want to. We can just create an instance of this class, and then we can solve it or create a new puzzle or whatever. So let me quickly go over through this Sudoku class. It has a constructor, and in that we can provide a parameter as a 2D grid to this or not. If we provide it, it will initialize our Sudoku with that 2D grid. Otherwise, it will create a random puzzle. And this create puzzle function is same that we wrote in our previous video. Then we have a solution. Then we have two flags. One is solved and one is a valid Sudoku puzzle or not. Then we have two getters. One getter is for the puzzle, and this just simply returns the Sudoku itself. And then there is a solved puzzle, which is the getter for our solved Sudoku right here. Then we have some functions. One is validate. Then I added this is valid solution. I'll get back to it in a little while. And we have is solvable. This is also a logic that we wrote. This is also something that I added. These two functions are something that I added off screen. I'll explain these to you because these are very simple, and most of the work was already done in our previous video. We have is valid puzzle. This also makes use of these functions make use of this is valid puzzle and is valid solution helper functions. Let me explain them to you. First, let me show you this solve function. It is exactly the same that we wrote in our last video, and these two functions are also the same that we wrote in our previous video. So let me now explain to you what are these functions. So we have two functions. One is checking whether or not the puzzle that we have at the moment is a valid puzzle or not, and then we have a valid solution or not. For example, if someone wants to solve it and then wants to check whether or not his or her solution is correct, then we can just simply check it by this. So let me first tell you what is this is valid puzzle function. It is making use of this Sudoku util is valid puzzle function right here. So how do we check whether or not a puzzle is valid? We want to see if there we just want to check three things. There shouldn't be any number in a single row that is repeating more than once, and same with the column. Every number in a column should be a unique number. And then we have to check in a box that I called here is a subgrid actually, and there shouldn't be any repeating number in any subgrid. And then there are these functions, these helper functions here. I go through every row and check whether or not there is a repeating number, and then I do the same with column, I do the same with box. And if there are no repeating numbers, that means that we have a valid Sudoku puzzle, and then it returns true. Otherwise it will return false if it finds any of the repeating number in a row or a column or a box. So you can go through this code. It is fairly simple. And then there is valid solution. So checking for a solution is also something that you can say makes use of this is valid puzzle. The only difference is first I am going through the whole grid, and I first check whether or not every you can say tile or box is filled. If every box is filled, then I check whether or not it is a valid puzzle. That means all of our three rules comply. Otherwise, if any of this grid is not filled, is empty, it will return false. That means it is not a valid solution. Or if all of these are filled, then we check if it is a valid puzzle. This function that I have already told you is checking whether or not there is a repeating number in a row, box, or a column. and then we return true or false respectively. So these are the changes that I made after my last video, and I didn't record them because it will make quite this video quite long. And then I have here a basic setup of our of a React application. Let me close these. So I have added some CSS also. I will not write all of these here in this video, just to not make it very large, very long. I will go through this CSS as we progress through our app. And then we have app.js. We have a Sudoku component which is at the moment empty. So this is where we will begin our video for today. We have a Sudoku and Sudoku game. So in here, what do we want? So let's first give this a class name, and let's call this Sudoku. And these class names are already predefined. If you will find it here, and I'll explain to you the CSS as we go along. And then in this div, what do we want to have? We will have a board component which will render our Sudoku game, and then we will have an interface component to have some interaction with it. It will have some button and a way for us to see whether or not we have something. Actually, it will just be an interaction. And we will also have to create these components. If I can go to my source folder, add UI, and then in here we'll add board.js, and we will also add interface.js. And we'll simply, for now, we'll say rfce, save. And if we go here, we can import board from here, and we will import interface from this folder, right? So this is basically will be our Sudoku game. Let's now go to our board. So to keep things simple, we can divide this board further. I think let's also add file with tile and call it rfce. We will also import it here, tile, from this. And in our board, we will now have our tile. Give this a class name of board. This will be our complete board, and then we will just simply render our tile component here. Okay, so let's now go to our tile component. And one thing is for sure, that we will have to pass in our 2D array from our Sudoku to our board, and then we will have to pass it all the way to our Sudoku, to our tile component right here. So as of now, I haven't passed it here. But I do know that I will have to do it. So let's destructure it right here. And I don't think I need this here. So what do we want to do? I'll go through this map, this grid, and it will give me a row, and it will have a row index. And then for every row, I want to map over this row also. It will give me a column and a column index, right? And for now, what I have is basically a point in a 2D grid. And what do I want to have here? I want to have basically an input element with a class name of, so class name will be different. I will get back to this a little bit later. For now, we'll have some value to it, and this value will also be let's for now call this value a. Oh my god, let's add 1 here. And it will also need to have a key, otherwise it will give us a warning all the way. So this key will be, it has to be something unique. That's why I have indexes here. I can do this row column, sorry, column index, column index, so it will be unique for everyone. And then what do I want to do more? We will have an on change for the for its value to change later, but for now we have just set this value to 1, and we will have to use this also. Okay, so before moving back to our board, let me quickly handle this class name. So I want to have some kind of functionality where I know what values are provided to me as a puzzle and which values am I adding. So I'll have to have some, you can say, different class names for both of those situations. So that tells me that I will have another value here which will another grid, 2D grid here, which will tell me the initial position, initial puzzle, right? Not the one that I'm changing. This is the one that I'll be mutating. This will not be mutating as we go, as you solve, but it will only be like initial puzzle that we receive. So here we will say if puzzle row index and column index is not equal to 0. So if it is not equal to 0, that means it is already taken by the puzzle, then we'll call it initial. And otherwise, what do we want to do? So we will check whether or not the value of it is 0. Let's call this value also whatever we have in column, and if column is not equal to 0, we will say that it is, if it is equal to 0, it will be taken, otherwise it will be a simple type. So what does this mean? This means that this will have a class name of initial when our puzzle, when this input is taken by our puzzle. Otherwise, when we enter something in our grid, it will have a additional class name of tile, taken, and also as well as tile. But if we have not entered anything in this input, and this input is already not taken by our puzzle, it will simply have a class name of tile. And when we initialize our project, I will tell you what will happen to our I'll also explain the CSS. Okay, so let me go back to our board, and I will have to pass in here grid, which will be grid, and I will also pass in puzzle, which will be puzzle, and these two will be the things that I will receive from my Sudoku. So let me move this here because I don't know why. Okay, so these are the things that we will receive from our Sudoku. Let's go back to here and add the same to our board here. And since these are not yet initialized, let's import quickly useState and useRef. So this will be a very good example for a useRef. So useRef, let me first initialize our grid, grid set grid, and it will be okay. So I cannot put a 2D grid here. Let's add a function, function get grid. So this function will return me a 2D array, and that we have already written somewhere. Let me find out here. Did we have it here? I think yeah. So we have this here. Let's copy from here and paste it here. We'll say let grid is equal to an empty array, and for each array we will not do this. We will just say grid dot push an array of 9 length, and each of the element will be filled with a 0, and we'll return this grid here. And then we will simply call this function here, and this will set our this grid with a 2D array of all zeros of the size of this 2D array will be 9 by 9. Okay, so the next thing that I want to do is I also want to okay, then we'll do the useRef thing later. For now, let's go to our interface and have some things here. Okay, so this will be class name of interface, and inside we'll have okay, I'll also have to change this to React just so we have access to JSX. This will be our div, and inside this div we will have another input, and this input will have okay, this value, it will be a type of text, but this will only be read only, and the value for this will be provided by our Sudoku game, and it will be, we can call it status, and whatever status that we provide it provide to it will render it here. Okay, and let's give this a class name of info section of our interface. Then I'll say just call it interface, and let's also copy this down here, and this will be our action interface, whatever actions that we want to have. Let's okay, so what do we want to have? What we want to have some buttons. Okay, so there will be one button to generate a puzzle. So this will have a class name of it will be generate button, and it will also have a class name of simple button, and okay, this we'll call this create. And what do we want to have? It will have one on click, but let's not add that one right now. Let's also add a couple of more buttons. We will have some functionality to validate our button, and we'll have the value of we'll have the text of validate here. Then we have solve button. It will have a functionality to solve, and then we will also have a button to clear stuff, clear our Sudoku game. Okay, so all of these will have some kind of functionality, and let's add it as we go. So it will have, all of these will have some functionality, but I don't want to write a different function for each of them, so we'll just have handle interface, a function that we'll pass in from our Sudoku game to here, and then whichever button that we press, we'll just simply pass in an action from here, right? So if we are clicking our create button, then we'll pass in a create as an action, and then whenever we write this function, we'll have some kind of handle functionality to this. This will be validate, and this will be clear, solve, and clear. Okay, so I think this should be it for this one. Let's go back to our Sudoku game. Okay, so now what we have left is to write our Sudoku game. But before we write our Sudoku game, what do we want to have? And we want to have another thing, which will be our API, or we can call it service. And let's add api.js. Inside this one, we will have some API calls that we'll make to our backend, and receive and send our puzzles and their solutions here. So it will have some different functions. The first one will be the get board function, and this function will all of these functions will return promises, right? So we'll make a fetch call. So this function will simply return a promise, and it will make a fetch call to this endpoint to our backend, and whatever we send back from our backend, it will just simply, we can write some logic here and await that. So after this one, we will have another logic, another function here, which will be solveboard function, and the endpoint will be a little different. We'll just simply call this one solve, but it will not just do this one. If we want to solve a board, we will also have to send whatever we have on our front end or on our client side at that moment. We'll have to send that to our backend and then receive a solution to that particular you can say puzzle. So it will receive some kind of grid, and we'll make an object here, and it will call it board, and it will be equal to our grid, and then we will send this to our backend with this fetch request, and we'll add a method. It will be a post request. Okay, and we can add headers. Let's add headers. Headers will be content type, and the content type will be application JSON. Okay, and the next thing that we want to have here is obviously our body, and it will be JSON.stringify our data that we have right here. So this is how we'll send our data, our grid, to our backend with this function, with this API call, and we'll receive this grid to our backend and then solve for that this particular grid and send back our solution. Okay, so the third and the last thing that I want to have is a validate functionality to validate whatever we have on our front end at the moment, and it will be, I think, the same thing. We'll just have to manipulate it a little differently on our backend when we write that there. So this will be our API for to make calls to our backend. Let's also import that here. Import REST from what did I call it? Service and API.js. I did export it yet, right? But this is a named export, so I have to write it inside our inside the brackets, the curly brackets here. Okay, so now what do we want to have? So we have some basic API calls here, right? So let's now add some functions here that we can then pass into our interface, that we have written some buttons here. Okay, so how do I want to let's write a different function for every functionality, right? So what do we want to do first? We'll have a function to create our Sudoku, right? And this function will not receive anything, but it will return us a new grid. So what will we do here? So first of all, we'll have a try catch here, because we will be using async await here. We will await rest dot get board. So we'll get something back from here, and then response data is equal to await response dot JSON. And if we want to use await here, we will have to make this function an async function. And if we find some error, we can just simply console.log this error for now. Error, and we have some data, but we'll return this data.game. Okay, so when we write our backend, we will have to write it like this, that we get an object in response to our call for this puzzle endpoint, and in that object we will have a game property, which will be our puzzle that we then we'll then render to our front end. So this will be our handle create function, which will not receive anything as a parameter, but it will return us a simple Sudoku game, which we will get from our backend. So the next function that I want to write is obviously the solve one, handle solve. And what do we want to do here? Basically the same thing, just this will be different, and we will have to pass in some parameter here, because what do we want the solution of? So whatever we have at the moment on our screen, which will be inside our grid state here, we'll pass that in here, and then we will await our response, and it will make it JSON. And before we return anything, as we because we have already seen that we have different checks whether or not our puzzle is solvable, whether or not it is a valid puzzle or invalid puzzle. So we have some status from our backend to check whether or not the thing that received back was a valid solution or was it something else. So in case we find a solution, we will have to set our grid. I don't want to set that grid here. Let's say if this is a valid solution, the status is true, that then we will return the whatever the solution that we got from our backend. Let's not call this one game, let's call that one solution. Otherwise we will just simply return grid, whatever we had at the moment. Okay, so before I go ahead, let's also add another state. It will be puzzle status, and I'll call this one puzzle status, set puzzle status, use state, and initially let's have this as empty. And here I will use this set puzzle status, and I will set this to solved. And otherwise, if I don't find a valid solution, I will say unsolvable, and return the same grid that we passed in to our function. Okay, so this will be our second one, and the third one will be the validate one, right? Let's add this one here, handle validate, and we'll also pass in our grid to this one. Why? Okay, no, not here, we don't want to pass it here. We'll have some we'll pass our grid to our validate board function. We'll await the response, and then we will just in this case we don't have any solution. We'll just simply return data.status, whatever status that we see, whether or not it is a valid puzzle or not. We'll just simply get a true or a false, right? So these are simply three functions that we wrote for our functionalities. Let's now add a function that we can pass into our interface that we have already received in here, handle interface. So let's write this function here, and also we have some kind of a status here, right? This will be actually puzzle status, I think. We'll get back to this later. Let's now add a function with the name of handle interface to our handle interface. And as we have already seen here, that whenever we call handle interface, we call it with an action, and we will have it here. Okay, so how do we want to pursue it? Let's one thing is for sure, that we will have some kind of switch statement for our action, and whatever that action B that we have like generated whatever action that we call from our interface, we will have will do something corresponding to that one here. So the first case will be create, and for create, what do we want to do? We want to have a grid. Let's call it let new grid, and what do we want to do? We want to call our function that we have already written here, handle create. We will say await handle create. Since this is an async function, we will have to await here, and since we want to use await here, we'll also have to make this one an async function. We will get some new grid, and then we will okay, so we'll have to do two things here. We'll have to set this back to nothing, and we'll set grid to whatever grid that we received from our backend, and then we will have break. So this will be the case number 1, which will be a create case. The second will be the solve, and here for this new grid we will have to await our handle solve method, and what we receive back from that one will be a solution, and we will simply set this to set our you can set this puzzle status. Okay, we have already set the puzzle status here, so we don't want to do it over we don't need to do it again here. And the reason why I did it here, because I don't want to write this if and else here, because this function will already get very lengthy. So this will be our second you can say case. Let's now move to our third one, which will be validate, and this will be we don't want a new grid. We don't want a new grid here. We just want to find out whether or not status of our current puzzle is valid, the solution is valid or not. So we'll call validate function here, and we'll call that with an await, and okay, so this will be a tricky one. We can simply do something like, so let's not do this here. Let's have another variable plus status. So whether we'll receive a true or a false with in this status, right? So if we get a true, we'll just simply say it is solved. Otherwise we'll say unsolved, and then we'll set this puzzle status as our puzzle status, and we'll simply just break here. And now let's add a default, and here we'll just simply throw new error valid action. If someone provides a different action than this one, then we'll just simply throw an invalid action exception here. Okay, so there is one key thing missing now from our game. Let's try to run it first. I am almost certain that it will not run, but let's try anyway. npm start. Let's go to our Google Chrome, localhost 3000. Okay, run. Okay, puzzle is not defined. 70 Sudoku 78 and 22. Here we have 72. 78, not 72. So we have, okay, so this puzzle is not defined. Yeah. So this is the thing that is missing from our you can say whole purpose of our game. You can say the heart of our game. So this puzzle is basically something that we receive. How do we want to let's have a useRef here. We'll call it initial grid, and it will be a useRef, and we will call get grid here. And so this will initialize our grid, our initial grid as all zeros, right? And when we receive a puzzle which is right here, this is where we are creating a new puzzle, right? So we will also have some let's 2D copy 2D array, and we'll copy whatever puzzle that we received to our initial grid dot current, which will be our property in here. Okay, so this will also say, let's now write this function also. We already had this function, I guess. Yeah, copy grid here, this one. Let's go back to our here. Let's function copy, what did I call it, 2D array. It will be from and to, and this should be here then. I think this is it. Puzzle is still not defined, and here instead of puzzle I want to have initial grid dot current. Okay, so this loaded perfectly. Okay, so we have something. I didn't think that it will do a lot of I thought it will have some errors, and obviously our these buttons are not working because we have nothing on our backend yet. So, and all of these are initialized as zeros because in our tiles we just simply, okay, so there is one thing that I also want to add. So all of these are empty at the moment, right? So these are initialized as zeros, but we don't want to do that. We know that our zeros are basically, the zeros are basically how to say empty, right? So why is this? So zeros are basically empty, right? So we'll check whether or not our column is equal to 0. If it is equal to 0, we don't want to print anything, otherwise we'll print 0. So if I go back, we now don't see anything. But if we have something in here, if I want to write, okay, I cannot write it here because I don't have any handle change here. Let's now add handle, oh no, on change here. So for our on change, what do we want to do? We certainly want to call a function that we have to write. It will have to have a row index, it will have to have its row column, and it will also have to have whatever event that we have fired from here. Let's now, we will also need to provide this function from here to our board. Let's also add this here and go to our, let's close this API, and to our board we will also have to have this here. Okay, so handle change is not defined. Let's now write a function for this handle change. What do we want to do in this function? So we do know that receiving row, we are receiving column, and we are receiving an element that we fired. And if we can do this. We can just simply go ahead and grab whatever is inside our grid at the moment, and then we'll say grid row, grid column will be equal to e dot target dot value, right? If I am not mistaken. And then we can simply set grid to our new grid. Let's to be safe, let's cast this to a number, but it also has some problem here. Row column. Okay, so there is something wrong. What did I write? Okay, this is column index. I don't know why I keep writing this. So now I should be able to write and something here, but as you can see, now I can write whatever I want to here. Like I can keep writing, it will not stop. I can even write alphabets, numbers here, alphabets here. So I don't want to do that. So this is showing me NaN because I have casted this to a number, but we want to have some kind of logic here which will not let us write anything from more than we'll only write numbers from 1 to 9 here, right? We cannot write any number from that is bigger than 9, or not a number for that matter. So let's now add a functionality, and obviously we will have to use some regex. Const regex will be come on, regex will be, it will begin with something from 0 to 9, and we can have actually I can do this with 9, but let's go with it. And it will also be ending with the same thing, right? So I think this is it. Let's call this G, not G, and then we can have we'll just simply say if e dot target dot value is equal to null, and or re dot test e dot target dot value. Only in that case we want to do this stuff, right? I think I'm right. Let me check it real quick and then explain to you what I'm doing. Okay, so there is still something wrong. So let's try to write ABC. Okay, so we cannot write you cannot see, but I'm typing random words, random alphabets, but I can still write numbers that are I can keep writing numbers, right? So for that what I can do here is I can add another logic that number, will cast this to a number, and we'll check whether or not this is less than this has to be less than 10. One more thing that I want to do is we had initial grid, right? So we cannot change a number that we are getting from our puzzle. So row column is not equal to 0. Actually it will be equal to 0. So if this has to be equal to 0 in our at this row and column indexes, our initial grid that we receive, which is actually our puzzle that we are not changing in any renders, it should be 0. That means initially it should be empty and the value should be less than 10. Only then we can change it. Okay, so there is something wrong. What is wrong? Okay, so I forgot the block scope here. Okay, so let's now refresh, and I cannot type any number that is more than 9, and for that matter if I receive something from my backend, I will not be able to write anything actually here if this is provided from my backend. Okay, so the video is getting quite long. Let's now quickly go back to our backend and let's create our backend application. So what do we want to have here? Let's close this. First thing is, okay, so one more thing that I want to point out here. I have installed some dependencies here, nodemon express and force express import, and we'll also import our Sudoku class, Sudoku, from sudoku.js, and we'll have util from util.js. So these will be our imports, and we'll have an application made with express quickly, and after that this will be using express JSON parser, express.json, express.json, and it will also be, we'll also be using CORS. This CORS basically allows us to send requests from cross platforms, because our front end will be on a different port and our backend will be on a different port. So let's spin up our backend server on port 5000, and for our callback, let's say console.log server running at port 5000. Let's quickly spin up, add another terminal here, cd server and npm run dev. Okay, we have the server running here. Okay, so let's first write our app.get the endpoint to get the puzzle. Okay, so the callback function that it should have is, what do we want to do here? We want to create a Sudoku. Let Sudoku is equal to new Sudoku, and we'll not provide any our parameter here, because we are creating a new random Sudoku, and we'll just simply say let Sudoku is equal to Sudoku.puzzle, and let's not name these the same way, and we'll just simply send the status res dot come on res dot status status 200, and we will send the game as our puzzle. Okay, I think that this should work. Let's I forgot something, request and response, but I don't think that I'm using request here, that's why but I'm using response here. Okay, so let's go back to in here, call in create. Okay, so there is something, we are getting some data from our backend, but there is something wrong with our CSS. Let's quickly go there and fix it. So I misspelled initial here. I think it should fix the problem. Yeah. Okay, so we are getting a new Sudoku every time we are doing it. We are doing our stuff here. So let's go back to our index.js quickly and write the next endpoint, which is solve. So for solve, we don't want to do this, because we are getting our puzzle from our front end, which will be in our body, in our request body, and we do have util.copy grid function, and this will be in our request.body.board, and we'll copy it in our puzzle array, which I initialized here, and then we will call in our Sudoku with this puzzle, and after that we'll check whether or not we have solution. Sudoku dot is solvable, and if it is solvable, if solution, if it is solvable, then what do we want to do? Let's also have a status here, and also have solved Sudoku. If it is solvable, we'll have solved Sudoku is equal to Sudoku dot solved solution, which was our getter for solved solution. Was that I think the same? Let me quickly check the getter name. It was solved puzzle, not the solved solution. It will be solved puzzle, and the status will be true in this case, right? And otherwise, if it is not solvable, I don't think I need to have this one, but I just need to send this false. I don't think I need to send this right back. Okay, but we will send back this one because we will not have any thing in our solved puzzle, and in here we will send in our how did we set up our API? Not API. How did we set up our handle solve? Is our handle solve function. So we have data dot status and data dot solution. So in our solution we will have solve Sudoku, and then we have status, which will be our status. And let's now go create solve. Okay, it broke. There is something wrong. Okay, there's something wrong. Let me go and quickly check. Okay, so I found the problem. The only problem was that this was not a get request, it should be a post request, and now it's working fine. If I can create a new one, I can add stuff to it, and I cannot edit this because we've added this logic. And if I call solve now, it will break. Okay, so I need to do this, sorry. And if I create now and solve, I am getting a solution. Create, solve, I'm getting a solution. Create, and I add once here and I solve, I get unsolvable because this is not a valid puzzle. And if I now solve, I get a solution. Okay, so we have two endpoints. Let's now go ahead and write the third one, which will be validate. And it should be the same until here, and for our here we will only call status on our validate function that we had in our Sudoku class, and we'll just simply send our status back. So if I go back here, refresh, create, and I valid, it tells me solved, and when I solve it, it gives me solved already, and I think it is pretty much it. Also, we do have to write one more thing for our clear one. I think we already wrote it. Yeah, no, we didn't. Where is our handle interface function? Here we also need to add another case, which will be clear. And for clear, what do we want to do? We will set our puzzle status back to nothing, and we'll set our grid to get grid method again. So I think okay, but it is not okay. So what is happening here, as you see, if I clear it, but this CSS class doesn't clear because this CSS class is making use of our, if I go to my tile, it is making use of our puzzle, which is basically in our useRef. So whenever we are setting our set grid, we also need to do one more thing, which is clear our dot current property. We'll say const new grid is equal to get grid, and this get grid will be, we'll say what do we want to do. We basically want to copy this new grid to our we can do that. I think this should work. Cannot access new grid before initialization. Okay, so new grid is already defined, sorry. Let's refresh, create and clear. Yeah, now it is working perfectly fine. I think this should be it. One more thing that we can do is we can add some kind of timer here to see how much time does it take for someone to solve a Sudoku, or we can do a lot of different things with it. And this video has got, I think it is my longest video so far, almost an hour long. Okay, so this was it. Let me go through our app.css. I forgot to do that. So nothing super fancy here. We have some variable setup, we have some basic removal of padding and margin, and then for our Sudoku I have done this as a flex, and flex selection is column to space these apart. So this is our board and this is our interface section in our Sudoku, and then we have our tile. Each tile is this input, and each input is 40 pixels high and 40 pixels wide, and text align is centered in this one. There's font, and then there is some margin left and margin top to make these lines equally, you can say, width. Otherwise these will be much wider than the corner ones. Then we have some taken tiles. So you can see that whenever I type something in here, so the background color changes a little bit. So whichever tiles are taken, we have a little darker color than a normal tile, which is color 1, and for this the color is a little darker, and also the font color is changed in here. You can see it is a little grayish type. And then there is initial one. Initial one is the one that we are receiving when we make call to our backend that we receive a puzzle in. So it is the background is much darker and the font color is plain black. So in here, if you see, all of these things are same, only the background color and background color is different, which is a little darker. And then we have our board. So as you can see, these boards are in a 9x9 grid, and what better than a grid to set it as a display. So we've set the display as a grid, and then we have columns template as 9 columns, and all of them are have the same fraction of width. And then we have some padding to like space these apart. We have interface section, we have info interface section. So these are basically very simple ones. We have some basic hover effect on our buttons. So I think this is it for this video. Quite a long video. If you have watched it completely, thank you so much, and don't forget to subscribe this channel. If you haven't already, leave a like, leave a thumbs up, whatever you want to, and see you again in the next video with another exciting project. Thank you, goodbye, until next time.